Welcome to Your Week with St. Luke's, a weekly podcast from St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Orlando that invites you to go deeper with Scripture, to learn God's story, so that together we can live, love, and lead a life following Jesus to awaken disciples and reveal the kingdom. Hello, St. Lukers, and welcome to Your Week with St. Luke's. We are continuing in our Beyond the Box series. I'm here with Pastor Jenn and Pastor Jad. I'm Pastor Melissa, and we are continuing with our second week of this series. Last week, we looked and started our journey in wisdom literature in the book of Proverbs with Proverbs 2 and our reminder to seek wisdom. This week, we are shifting into Proverbs 15 for a moment, and our reminder this week is to do no harm. This is one of those that is near and dear to our hearts, both because it is absolutely scriptural, but it is also part of what it means to be Methodist. And we'll talk about that as we go through. So let me just kick us off, and I will read this text from Proverbs 15 as we begin, and then we'll sort of talk a little bit more about what it offers us, as well as what it means to do no harm. From Proverbs 15, we'll be in verses 1 through 8, and then jump to verses 17 and 18. A gentle response diffuses anger, but a sharp tongue kindles a temper fire. Knowledge flows like spring water from the wise. Fools are leaky faucets, dripping nonsense. God doesn't miss a thing. He's alert to good and evil alike. Kind words heal and help. Cutting words wound and maim. Moral dropouts won't listen to their elders. Welcoming correction is a mark of good sense. The lives of God-loyal people flourish. A misspent life is soon bankrupt. Perceptive words spread knowledge. Fools are hollow. There's nothing to them. God can't stand pious poses, but he delights in genuine prayers. Better a bread crust shared in love than a slab of prime rib served in hate. Hot tempers start fights, but a calm, cool spirit keeps the peace. There's a lot in those verses.
So good. Put that on a throw pillow. That's good, right?
I love this one.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is the one. I don't want to say one is more important than the other because they all build on one another.
Right.
You, but this is the most, it feels like this is the most urgent one. Do no harm. Because man, there's a lot of nonsense and harm happening.
There is.
Yeah.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love one of the things I love about this, God doesn't miss a thing. I was talking to some kids and they were not church kids. They were from another place, and they said something, but it was community people, and they were walking around somewhere on the campus, and they're like, "Oh, we can't say that because we're on the church campus." And I was like,
right.
You think God hears you better here?
Right.
So you're gonna say it like, I'm gonna let you cross the street and you say whatever you just said, which was foolish. It was foolish. It wasn't like cursing. It was just foolish. And I'm like, you don't think God hears that? God doesn't miss a thing. And for me to realize some of the harmful things I've said or done, and to just think about that, and not that God, I don't believe in God, the lightning zapper, mind you, but that if I say I'm following God, I am seeking after God's heart, right? As a psalmist would say, if I'm wanting to be Christ-like, and I say that in my worship and my proclamation on Sunday morning, and then I leave on Sunday afternoon and just say the most harmful thing, how do I continue to break God's heart with the harm that I've done? Because I forget that God doesn't miss the thing.
Right. It make me think my dad used to always say, if you can't say it at church, you shouldn't say it at all.
Yeah. Right.
And what does it matter? Well, this is God's house. Well, God created all of this earth, and God created each person you're talking bad about or negative about or hurtful towards. So what does a building matter? It's what you, which gets back to like, what we're getting at. But yeah. Yeah. God
And
doesn't miss a thing.
it's also, like you said, Jen, it's not the zapping kind of thing, but God doesn't miss a thing isn't for us to be fearful to
No.
get caught. Particularly because there's no getting caught. It's just God
Right.
doesn't.
It is,
Um,
right.
Yeah.
but
That's
but
not a thing.
it's not the parent figure you're afraid of getting punished by. It's the
Mm-mm.
person you respect deeply who you
Yes.
don't want to see you in that way. Where it's not that they're not gonna do anything different. They're not, but you don't want them to see you in that light.
Right.
That's the key of that piece of God is present in all of those places, seeing all of who we are and what we're about. It's not like um what
Well, and it's using the wisdom that we're talking about.
Mhm.
Like you can't say anything nice, don't say it at all, right? There's another old saying that and I remember when people were so down on being political, don't talk PC. And when I was up in the mountains of Georgia, there was a couple of my members are really upset about PC. And I said, well, my grandma always told me if you can't say anything nice, don't say it at all. And they all went, yeah. I'm like, that's what it sounds like to me. Let's just be kind. How can we be more gentle with our words?
Mhm.
And so we need to use the knowledge we have like we talked about last week. Let's a gentle response diffuses anger.
Mhm.
Mhm. Well, and I love because you do think about those things like, if you can't say anything nice, sticks and stones break my bones and, all that. Words do, the
Words
words
harm.
harm.
Yeah.
People, I mean, how many of us still can look in the mirror and see something wrong with ourselves and it's reflected back, and, we put down the way we look or the way what our body is or, whatever it is that we feel shameful about. And we can go back to the origin of that because of someone's words,
Yeah.
because someone said something about our knees being ugly. And so we never wear shorts, it's,
Right.
they do weren't we remember words, which is why we're so careful about words when we preach, or we're careful about how we talk about things, is because yeah, it 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 wounds people in ways that we can never imagine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the sticks and stones stuff is temporary. Not that that doesn't do long-term, psychological wounding too.
Right.
But man, I can tell you exactly what that person said 20 years ago. I mean, you can still hear that vividly if it's one of those things that just sticks with you.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
what is that? Oh gosh. I mean, I- we can't how can we even we're recording this weeks before you are hearing it. So who knows what has happened in our country in
Yeah.
the weeks since we have recorded this.
I
Just
hope
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and say it because our bishop put out a beautiful letter about the misspeaking and the words that
stigmatization.
have been said about Haitians.
Right.
I hope to heavens when this comes out, we are past that.
Yeah.
Because I've been watching the words get worse and the things that are being said about people get worse and worse and worse. And it harms the belovedness of another person, which
Mhm.
again, if we are people who follow God, if we are people who say, mold me, make me, like you divine, if we're called to be humble, like Jesus Christ, we're called to see other people, even the ones we disagree with, that we tried on their stuff and it didn't fit us. It's okay because they're still beloved and they're beautiful. And so when we attack them, like I was on a webinar last week about an amendment. I was invited as a clergy person. and this was by some leaders who, first of all, assumed that all faith people are Christian, which was not true, that all faith people see things the same way. And the other way of seeing it, the other people were called liars.
Right.
They were, it was about Satan. And this is just not the way that
Jesus.
it's not the way of Jesus, but
It's not the way of Jesus.
it's not an efficient way to get things done either.
No. Yeah.
You-
I mean,
It's just not it's not a common sense way to get things done, as last week talked about, which is what it says here. Fools are leaky faucet dripping nonsense.
Yep.
Like when we are, yeah.
Yeah.
When we use temper fire and a sharp tongue, it's just not efficient for being good business leaders or whatever we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And sadly, it's an old playbook that has been practiced for millennia and continues to forget the words of Jesus, right? And to demonize somebody else or to minimize somebody else or to talk about another group of people in general and demeaning terms, it just it makes me think of you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, right? Those kind of little more of our modern day proverbs we're throwing out here, but it's just not kind. It's not helpful. It's not redeeming. And it's not the words of Jesus, and it's not what Proverbs is calling us to do.
Well, we're hitting. Go ahead.
And everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to jump down to some of these last couple of verses in verse 8 and particularly verse 17. The better of bread crust shared in love than a slab of prime rib served in hate. We're not necessarily talking about whether or not the desired outcomes of those who are speaking these words are our desired outcomes. We may agree fully with what the desired outcome is or not. It doesn't really matter if in the midst of moving towards something really great and wonderful, you're stepping all over people in between.
Right.
And that gets into our Methodist framework, right? That the general rules of the Methodist Church are first do no harm. And that first is there intentionally, that you first do no harm. And then rule number 2 is do all the good you can. Because if you're doing lots and lots of good, but by doing the good, you do harm, you are no longer doing good.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. And the kingdom's not revealed. Yeah.
Then a slab of prime rib. Because I like some prime rib.
Oh yeah.
But served in hate.
Sunday brunch.
All you're gonna do is choke on it. It's just not gonna be good. So
right.
I love that we so often we think we're doing good, but it's just full of the same rhetoric and divisiveness and everything else and pious. He says God can't stand pious poses, but delights in genuine prayers. So often the good we do is it can be couched in these pious postures that just take all the beauty of what we're trying to accomplish in it. So let's talk about the line. Do no harm. That we're gonna have t-shirts, by the way, that you can buy that say do no harm with a little ballot box with a little heart scribbled into it.
That'd be cool.
But because I think we all need to wear that shirt. But let's talk about the guidelines for this week. It's okay to disagree. All right. We sort of talked about that last week too, but it is not okay to shame, blame, or attack. Now, often we think it's just others, but it's also ourselves, right? Because we do a lot of harm in ourselves too. We silence ourselves, or we think we're stupid, or we think we're not good enough, so I think I love the mutuality of these guidelines that have to do with not only others, but not only love your neighbor, but also love your neighbor as yourself. So,
yes.
And all of them are mutually beneficial to whoever you're interacting with, that you're taking this posture with. But this is also taking care of you. To try on new things allows you maybe to find new things that work for you. And then with these, we get into both of them having both the social and personal component. One being that it's okay to disagree is not necessarily about it. I always like to say it is not agree to disagree. It's not the same thing, because agree to disagree, when we say that, we have now ended a conversation. We have decided we aren't even going to try. it's okay to disagree means that we can show up with, and all of our voices can be in the conversation. Even if you feel like nobody else in the room has whatever opinion you have, that we
Right.
don't want to be threatened by new perspectives. It doesn't necessarily even mean that all experiences are equal. It doesn't mean that what I have to share, by hearing a disagreement, I may learn something new that corrects something I do too, and vice versa. So we want
Yeah.
to be able to make space, both to hear something that we disagree with, but also to feel courageous in some ways, but to feel safe to speak a divergent opinion, especially when you may think that the rest of the room shares a different one. And then
Right.
the companion of that, of it being not okay to blame, shame, or attack. I always say, in most St. Luke's spaces, I'm not afraid of someone just like lashing out on somebody, at least in person, I'll say. But we do things that maybe are more subtle, that are vocalizations, like a little scoff, or some body language that changes, just eye rolls or whatever it might be. That is in there. And then on the personal side of it, we want to be sure that we aren't blaming, shaming, or attacking ourselves, which we do when we
Yep.
say things like, well, this might be stupid, but,
Right.
or I don't know if I'm not really an expert on this, or I don't know if I've got this right. We discount our own experience, that when we want to bring that confidently, and it doesn't, and I'm not saying proudly,
Oh, yeah.
bring it in a way that we know that our voice is welcome, and to trust that it will be held in that way, that we don't
Yeah.
have to immediately give caveats for our own experience, particularly if it's our experience, because if it's your experience, then it's your
No one can
experience.
take
That's
that.
real.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so both of these are about making sure that we are inviting interaction with one another, because that's what I see more than anything else, is people who desire to do no harm completely just getting out of any interaction, avoiding any interaction. I'm off social media, which is not always a bad thing, but I'm just not going to be on social media. I'm not going to talk to people. I'm just going to talk to people that I know I agree with. I'm going to stay out, which there is wisdom in that. There
Sure.
is wisdom where that is
Remain
coming.
You
safe.
taught me a sequence last week, so sometimes the only way I'm gonna do no harm is to shut up and not do it.
Just gonna zoom.
And at some point, the only way that anything that we're experiencing gets better is if we have spaces where we're able to have conversation.
Yeah. And I'm glad we hit to that point, because we talked about humility before, and sometimes humility leads us to a place of silencing ourselves. I know I struggle with that a lot this summer, with attempting to be in a space but not take a space. But I went so far as I silenced myself and my perspective, out of fear of it becoming the dominant, or right. But at the same time, I had to find that there's a middle road to being a loving presence that might have a differing perspective. But both of those for me go together beautifully. There, I'm glad you hit on that a little bit there, Melissa, because I think oftentimes our attempt to be humble, or at least I know for me, I end up blaming and shaming and isolating and pushing myself down, when that's not God honoring either, right? Calling for space for others means I got to use my space to open space for others, right? And so I think it's an important aspect of this wisdom.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Jad, because you and I have talked about that before. We've talked about it this summer. It makes me realize too that some of this happens because it's easy to talk about the ways people are doing harm because they just are like creating conflict with their words, right?
Right.
But sometimes do no harm and it being okay to disagree means we are not conflict averse.
Right.
Right.
And sometimes we think do no harm means, oh, I have to resist conflict. I have to run away from conflict. But conflict is where the true beauty of reconciliation happens, and resurrection happens, and conflict gets to the wisdom, doesn't it?
Yep.
Conflict
brings greater truth.
Understanding. So yeah, being able to say it's okay to disagree means it's okay to have conflict. And that's not necessary. You don't have to do harm, right?
In conflict.
It's a conflict.
Right.
It's harm when your conflict is blaming, shaming, or attacking someone.
Attacking.
But yeah, conflict that is healthy and conflict that is actually getting to resolution, you doesn't automatically mean you're harming someone.
And what's fascinating, we're only a couple of guidelines in, but one of the things that often I hear when I teach people these, they say, well, that's great when we've all agreed to do these, but I'm mostly in spaces where nobody else is following the guidelines. And I would say, but you can still take those postures. And it's amazing if you're in a space where it's all about the kind of conflict that does harm, where those are the words that are being used. There's tons of blame, shame, and attack. If you hold yourself and continue to make space for disagreement and refuse to blame, shame, or attack, it gets really hard for the other party to continue to do so. And so
Becomes
these are
obvious.
not necessarily, sometimes the language of something like these are covenants or
Covenant.
that all requires multiple people to agree to them. That's not what the guidelines require. The guidelines are for you as a posture as an individual. It's beautiful when a whole room of people embrace them. But if you as an individual embrace this, it's amazing how much you can keep your temper down a little bit. Your breathing will be a little bit slower if you're deciding to do this. Now, I'm not saying stay in a space where you're being deeply harmed again and again. But if you're trying to be
There's
engaged,
boundaries.
there are opportunities for you to set a different tone.
Ooh. It gets to what we just talked about with Daniel. It gets to being resolute in your faith. Like if I maintain this a posture that it's okay to disagree, which means I am on it, I am saying in the depth of my heart, it's okay to be in conflict.
Yeah.
It means we stand resolute in our faith and our beliefs and our values, right? And we reveal the kingdom by saying, you know what? Those words, I may not agree with you, but I think we can agree those words were hurtful. And so let's figure out a different way to talk about this. I want to understand your opinion. I want to seek wisdom. I want to seek understanding and insight. So let's not go into that kind of language, and let's talk about that and what a gift that is, because those are those opportunities that God gives it. Those are our opportunities to be the Daniels in the midst of this place beyond the ballot box, where we can go, you know what, let me reveal the kingdom of God in the midst of this conversation or midst of this pain. And it all connects with one another.
It does. Yeah, it does.
So go ahead, Jen.
No, I was going to bring it to a close. I think you were too.
I was going to say, so this week you'll have the opportunity to cast your vote. You probably were here last week, so you get to know each week we're challenging yourself to, and we're giving you get to, it's obvious. We want you to choose do no harm.
I hope.
You hope. But we want you to use this as a way to examine yourself each day, because some of the things that we don't always realize that does harm is we let our temper get the best of us. And that's that tongue that is used. James talks about that, when the tongue can cut and the words can cut. Use my voice or presence to devalue or dehumanize others. Like, when have we done that? Because a lot of us do it in ways we don't even realize we've done it. Right? Refuse to hear another perspective. So you're going to get to do that. And then you're going to practice the examine with a whole new set of Proverbs this week. So we hope that you'll do that as you prepare to come cast your vote in worship. So we'll see you next week.